Hey, how's it going? Nate Gall here, FatNat. Just wanted to share with you guys a little bit of my sketching process in this video. Never done a demo before, so here it goes. The random shape exercise. This one is one of my favorites. This is one I love to do. If you're on the bus and there's no one interesting on the bus with you that you want to draw, if you wanted to sketch but you have nothing in mind, you just want to warm up and get started, this is a great exercise. So basically you're taking a gesture or a doodle or a squiggle and letting that inspire something in you. Maybe it's a pose that you see in that squiggle, and then you can think about what kind of character would be in that pose. Or maybe it's the structure of a body, or it's the proportions that you see in that randomness, and you basically pull something out of it. And you try and maintain some aspect of that doodle's energy, or you want that to kind of carry through into the character a little bit. So this particular one came across online. Artist Stephen Byrne, as Twitter handle is at StephenByrne86. The Stevens with a PH and Byrne is with a Y. He posted up recently one of these doodles, and it just made me want to do this exercise I hadn't done in a while. So I thought I'd film it and show you guys some of the process that I might go through in designing a character with this method. So I hope you enjoy. Please excuse the weird camera positioning. I don't really have the best setup for this, but gonna work on it. Hope you enjoy and hope you get something out of it. Thanks. So what can you see in this shape? That's the whole point of this exercise. What can you pull out of it to design a character? These images are from the Animation Portfolio Workshop's Character Design Challenge. Maybe you get a shape that is silly in its proportions, so you draw something silly. Or perhaps you get a shape that's kind of sturdy and blocky, so you draw a sturdy, strong character. Maybe the shape is kind of weird, you just don't know what to do with it, so you draw something that's inspired by that weirdness. Maybe it's a violent brushstroke and it brings to mind a predator. Or maybe it's an exuberant, joyful brushstroke and it makes you want to draw something joyful that's close to your heart. Sometimes the sketches that you create with this method won't quite work out, won't make too much sense. Perhaps they'll be so silly you won't use them for anything ever. But it's still a great warm-up. It's a great jumping off point when designing characters, and it can inspire an entire environment and ecosystem. Or it can just fill the pages of a sketchbook in a matter of minutes. This exercise can be a really powerful tool for exploration and creative problem solving. Throw a bunch of random shapes down on the page, shapes that have some energy and variation to them, and then look at each one and just look for what the first thing that pops into your mind is. What's the first thing you see within that shape? What does it spark in your imagination? That's the idea that you run with. And you just explore. So for instance, on the first character in the top left, I saw a bulbous nose on his left side. And that's what I ran with. I started there and started to think about what sort of creature could this nose belong to. And as the ideas pop up, as the first idea that pops in your head, those are the ones that you run with. You'll be seeing a character pretty quickly, I think. You want to get these ideas just the point where the seed is there. You can come back later and develop them if you want to, but you want to move on before you develop too much. The point is to keep the creative problem solving part of your brain fired up. You want the imagination to keep those juices flowing. So you just keep moving on, get the seed of the idea down and move on. Now this could be used to explore other stuff. It can be used to explore posing. If you have a character that you've designed and you want to challenge yourself, you can throw down several pages of gestures. And that first line of action that you might draw in a life drawing class while looking at the model, you can just use these random gestures as that and build a pose off of it, and then draw your character in that pose. Another great use for it is to practice the use of visual language. What I mean by that is when you're learning to draw something new. I'll use myself as an example. I'm drawing birds a lot. I'm working on something that requires a lot of bird characters, and I wasn't really familiar with the visual language. What makes a feather look like a feather? What makes a beak look like a beak? A talon look like a talon? How are their feet structured? How does the beak meet the head? All that stuff that you need to know so that when you draw your character, it will be very clear to the viewer what it is. You don't want them guessing about whether it's a bird or a lizard. You want to know how to convey the information that's important. You want to know how to draw that phrase in the visual language that tells them they're looking at a bird or they're looking at a frog or an old man or a fairy or whatever it is that you're drawing. You want to familiarize yourself with that visual language so that you can convey it to the viewer very clearly, so that they aren't guessing. After you've done some studying of photography or real life, or doing some reference gathering and reference sketching, familiarizing yourself with that stuff, this is a great test. Fill up several pages with these random shapes and then go through and turn each one of them into a bird or a frog or an old man or a fairy. Whatever it is that you're trying to familiarize yourself with, it's a great test for the visual language that you've learned recently. It's also a ton of fun. So I hope you guys give it a shot. It's a great way to start the day. It's a great way to warm up. Okay, so in this section of the video here, you can see it's sped up. This is actually the sketch. You can see the sketch is kind of a bit further along than the doodle. Actually, I had begun sketching, and it was a couple minutes in when I decided to start actually recording the video. So it's not too much further along though. It's really basically that doodle with a bit of feather textures and the bird feet thrown on. So one of the things that I like to talk about while you watch the development of this guy is visual language. So right now I'm working on a book with my wife. It's like a children's book, a folk tale, and it involves a lot of birds. Now, I've drawn some birds, but it's been a while. Haven't drawn a ton, so right now, lately, I've been drawing quite a few birds, going a little bananas at the birds, trying to figure out the visual language, trying to figure out the phrases in the visual language that I can put down on the page and have the viewer immediately be able to recognize that is a bird. Whether it's figuring out the structure of beaks and how they meet the rest of the head, or figuring out how to convey the texture of feathers without going overboard in the detail. Trying to distill down that detail to only what's necessary. So I've been trying to do that lately. So this is why I'm sure why I saw a bird when I looked at this thing. I could probably look at a box right now, a square or a triangle, and see a bird. But for this video, I very quickly had this character in mind and wanted to explore some of that visual language too, as well as hammer out some concepts for what one of these characters may look like. So you can see that I have done a couple versions so far. I've played around with the face. I'm now throwing in and settled in on this sort of bill that I want, the hooked bill. It's a little aggressive, and his expression is a little condescending, which is what I was going for. It was kind of what I pictured. As soon as I saw this character in my head, it was sort of condescending, diplomat type character that the protagonist is being forced to meet with and has to put up with his holier than thou attitude. So as I go forward here, this is kind of this is one method, is grabbing a sheet of paper, throwing it over top, literally just it's not tracing over. You're going over it, and you're trying to maintain the feel, but at the same time explore. You don't want to just be going over the same lines and doing the same thing each time. You want to kind of explore different ways to approach different problems. So here I'm trying to figure out the volume and the shape of that wing that's closest to the viewer, and how can I use the feather texture, and maybe it's a color pattern on the wing. Trying to figure out how to best use the elements that someone expects to see there, like the feather texture, and how to best use that to also convey some information about the form and the volume. You can see now I'm going back up to the head plumage, which was a problem for me throughout this video. You'll see me working with it, struggling with it a bit. I was trying to use the feather texture to describe that the big blobby mass of head plumage, and it just it didn't really work out. I mean, it's possible to convey that and to have it as one big kind of mass of feathers, but for me, I decided that I needed to work on it a bit more, come up with a different solution. But here you can see I've switched to the ink and going over and inking it. That's not because I feel at this point that I've figured everything out and I'm going to finalize it. It's that sometimes I find that drawing in ink, even in a rough sketch, will give me a different quality of line. It's not necessarily better, it's just a different sort of level of confidence that you have when you put it down. You know that it's going to be final, and it's a bit of a committal, and it just has a different effect. And sometimes I figure out solutions to problems by being a little bit more in that mindset of, all right, you're putting this line down, it's going to be there. So you can see here I'm working on the face again, and also I'm exploring a little bit about how I want to ink this guy. So I'm basically right now refining the face and the head plumage. One thing about birds is they have very, very ornate feathers, and I think at this point in the video, I'm starting to realize that this guy could be a bit more ornate and a bit more fabulous, sort of. I can also see that I'm struggling with this hairpiece, with the head plumage. It's just a struggle. So still not using that, not really describing that form, describing that volume. A lot of information is on the page right now that doesn't need to be. So yeah, so when I run into that situation, usually I'll just grab a piece of paper, throw it over top, and give it another go. Try and figure out a different way to convey that information, that form. But not before exploring some stuff. Like at this point I realize I'm going to be redoing it. I'm going to be having to explore that head plumage because I'm just having so much trouble with it. And now you can see here I've switched over. I've grabbed the version of the bird that I did that I like the best at this point, and I'm now going over and just exploring different ways to describe the plumage on the head. Some of them work better than others, but you'll see here I go through I think 4 different ones before I settle on an approach. I think this is one benefit to this method of just having some animation paper, just like a really light paper, a light box, a light table, is that you just toss another piece of paper and you get a problem. You're trying to work out how to render something, how to draw that shape so that it feels right. You can just toss a piece of paper on top and sketch over it, or if you're drawing digitally, then you just do that layer and go over it again. But I'm personally not somebody who's has a crazy good visualization. It's something I'm working on, but sometimes I just need to get in there, try these different things that are popping up in my head, and see if they work. So at this point, you can see I'm a little frustrated. I kind of stopped there. I'm trying to figure out, geez, how am I going to convey this thing? How am I gonna solve this problem? Playing around with different shapes, I decide maybe it needs to be more ornate. So throw in some swirls and thinking maybe I can have a trim color on the edge of the feathers that will make it seem more royal. But deciding that's just making it more complicated. Just looked at this bird called the secretary bird, and gave me some ideas. Yeah, this thing kind of has these crazy little feathers on the back of its head that shoot out into these neat, long, thin black ones. Yeah, so I kind of realized there that I had some trouble with the volumetric approach, and that was the audio there was from actually while I was drawing, and you can hear me kind of realize that I need some help and go into the reference images I collected of some birds and found one that had some neat plumage, and just decided to rip off Mother Nature and let it inspire me, and created this kind of solution, which is, instead of having a dense volume of feathers, to have a few different types of feathers, to have some broader, larger crest-like feathers, smaller fluffy feathers you might find on like the underside of a chicken, or maybe even a chick baby, maybe even that fluffy as the second sort of layer, and then go from there into the long, thin, black, peacocky sort of accent feathers. And you'll see here I'm starting to play with the design elements, like where each of those circles might go, to create an interesting movement in the eye. And definitely still needs work at this point, but it's starting to play, put some new sentences together with those phrases in the visual language. And this one, I'm pretty happy with the second version. I think with the distribution of the fancy sort of black dot feather, like that. I like this, but if I do this, I should represent it in other parts of the character as well. So let's look at how we can put it maybe into some of his other plumage. Okay, so throwing down some details on the tail now. Basically just figuring out how I want to place those nice little ornate details. I think this second one really nails it, and I'm sure I can even push it much further. This thing could be pushed to the extreme, obviously, but this is roughly in the ballpark of what I'm thinking for this character. So I've got the tail figured out now. I've decided I'm confident I've got everything figured out. So I've spent the time and figured out a strategy for the top, the plumage, and I've done all the other work I need to. I've figured out the shape I want for the feathers, and how I want to use that texture. and I figured out how I want to treat those ornate feathers throughout the body, and the structurally I've got the idea down and very clear in my head at this point. So I'm just going through with the red coal race and just doing one last sort of exploration and getting the lines down and trying to explore one last time some of these elements, some of the eyelashes and other ornate elements that are new, playing around with those and trying to find a good home for them. And you can see now I'm going over the face. I think the sort of fluffy little back of the head actually helped quite a bit. I think this guy turned out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with him. You can see here I'm just right now about to pop that reference on. So that's the great thing. You're basically creating your own reference. You're creating an image. You can just this is like old school copy paste from Photoshop, I guess, but it's basically just toss that underneath and place it and go over it, and you can really take apart your character piece by piece and really analyze the design of a section that is giving you trouble with this method, and it works pretty darn good for those of us who can't visualize things immediately, who need to kind of get our hands dirty a little bit and explore. Yeah, so I am taking, you can see I've started inking here. I'm currently taking a course with SVN Learn taught by Mr. Jake Parker. And just really starting to learn more about inking, and hoping to bring that more into my work. And basically the approach I'm using now is just doing one line of thickness and of the ink all over the character, all over the drawing, and after that going through and doing additional lines to increase the thickness wherever I want the weight to be felt, where I want the strain and stress of the pose to be felt, and also of course to help depth, to use the lighter lines to push later wispier lines to push elements into the background, and hit those lines an extra bit of width to pop the foreground elements in, so to create the overlap in his body and have the proper relationships with the different shapes he's made up of. That course so far has been pretty good. I haven't really taken much of it, but just the first few classes, and so far it's awesome. It gives some really simple exercises to control motor skills, which I had never even heard of them before, and they're pretty cool. They're pretty good to test your control, and it's something I want to show my son at some point and see if he has an interest in working out those muscles. It's a pretty cool course so far. You should check his work out, actually. Jake Parker is a big inspiration for me lately with some of his posts and his videos. Made me want to do this video, actually. So check him out at MrJakeParker.com or at Mr. Jake Parker Twitter. That's his Twitter handle. So right now you'll see that I am going through and adding a bit of shading. I've shaded in the legs a little bit, tried to give them sort of just a little bit darker coloring, so that, or sorry, value, so that they read as the sort of the rough, scalier sort of leg texture, in contrast to the fluffy sort of feather texture. Just more nooks and crannies on it and stuff. I think I go a little overboard with the shading here, but as I said, still learning the finer points of shading with ink. Well, I hope that you enjoyed the video. I hope you got something out of it. And if you did enjoy it, I hope you'll subscribe to this channel. Also, you can find me on Twitter. The handle is @NateTGall. And a ton of my work can be seen at FatNatFun.com. Thanks for watching. And if any of you guys post the results of this exercise, if you go out there and you do the shape exercise and you get some stuff you want to share, please leave in the comments section a link for us to check out. Thanks, and talk to you again soon.